It was a warm, golden afternoon in Los Angeles, with sunlight spilling over the lively streets of Hollywood Boulevard. The air buzzed with energy as tourists strolled along the sidewalks, snapping photos and carrying shopping bags from upscale boutiques. Laughter and conversation echoed between the towering palm trees and glimmering storefronts. Among the sea of well-dressed pedestrians and carefree chatter, a man named Dave sat quietly on a street corner, almost blending into the backdrop of the city. Dave's appearance told a story of struggle. His clothes were threadbare, his hair tangled and unkempt. In his hands, he held a small cardboard sign that read, "Hungry. Anything helps." He sat slumped, his tired eyes scanning the endless parade of feet passing him by. His stomach growled loudly, a familiar sound by now. Hunger was a constant companion, one he had reluctantly learned to endure. The small pile of coins in front of him was barely enough for a bite of food, let alone a proper meal. He glanced at it and sighed, the weight of his situation pressing down on him like the heat of the afternoon sun. Most passers-by avoided looking his way. Some walked faster as they neared him. Others crossed the street entirely, as if his presence were a reminder of something they didn't want to acknowledge. On days like this, Dave couldn't help but feel invisible, like a shadow that went unnoticed in the midst of the city's glamour. Just as Dave began gathering his few belongings to leave, a shadow loomed over him. Startled, he looked up. Standing before him was a towering figure. The man was dressed simply, in a black hoodie and jeans, his face partially concealed by sunglasses and a baseball cap. The stranger's posture was relaxed but carried a quiet confidence. There was something oddly familiar about him, though Dave couldn't immediately place it. The man crouched down so that their eyes met, his movements deliberate but unthreatening. His voice was deep and kind when he spoke, as if he were addressing an old friend. "Hey, man," he said warmly. "How's it going?" Dave blinked, momentarily stunned. It wasn't often, if ever, that someone stopped to talk to him, especially not someone who seemed so composed and self-assured. Struggling to find his voice, Dave cleared his throat and mumbled, "Could be better. Just trying to get enough for a meal." The man nodded, his gaze flickering briefly to the sign Dave was holding. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet, causing Dave to brace himself. He'd seen this gesture before. Maybe the man would give him $1, $2 if he was lucky, before walking away like everyone else. Dave tried not to hope for more. Hope had let him down too many times before. But instead of simply pulling out a bill and moving on, the man did something unexpected. He paused, looking Dave directly in the eyes. His voice was calm but carried a surprising intensity. "How about I do more than that?" he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Let's get you sorted out today." Dave stared at him, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice hesitant, tinged with disbelief. The man stood, extending a hand to help Dave up. "Dead serious," he said without hesitation, his smile widening. "Let's start with some food. You like barbecue?" For a moment, Dave hesitated, glancing down at his dirt-streaked hands and worn-out clothes. The sincerity in the man's voice made him feel both hopeful and vulnerable, emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Finally, he nodded slowly and replied, "Yeah, I love barbecue." As he reached out and took the man's hand, Dave felt a mix of uncertainty and relief. His legs wobbled as he stood, weak from days of inadequate meals. The man's grip was firm but gentle, steadying him as they began walking down the street together. It wasn't until they started down the busy boulevard that Dave began to notice the stares. People turned their heads, some openly gawking, while others discreetly pulled out their phones to snap pictures. Nervously, Dave glanced at his unexpected companion. "Why's everyone looking at us?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with unease. The man chuckled softly, pushing his sunglasses down to the bridge of his nose. His face, now partially visible, was instantly recognizable. "They probably recognize me," he said casually, his tone almost playful. Dave's eyes widened in shock as the realization hit him. You're Keanu Reeves," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu Reeves grinned, his larger-than-life presence now unmistakable. Guilty, he said with a wink. Dave stopped walking, unsure of what to say. His gaze dropped to the coins still clutched in his hand, the familiar weight of doubt creeping back in. You don't have to do this, he said softly, his voice tinged with embarrassment. I mean, I'll be fine. Keanu stopped, turning to face him with a raised eyebrow. Man, it's just food, he said, his tone easy but filled with compassion. Everybody deserves to eat. Trust me, I've been hungry before. Ain't no shame in that. Dave hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded. Okay, he said quietly, still trying to process the surreal situation. Keanu smiled again, his tone light. Good. Now let's go get some barbecue. My treat. As they continued walking, Dave noticed the way people stared at them, at Keanu. Specifically, he could feel their curiosity, their whispers, and their phones capturing the unlikely pairing of a homeless man and a world-famous actor. It felt surreal, almost like a dream, but Keanu's calm presence reassured him. When they reached the restaurant, the rich aroma of smoked meats and barbecue sauce wafted out to greet them. Dave's stomach growled loudly, betraying his hunger. Keanu laughed, holding the door open and gesturing for Dave to step inside. Sounds like you're ready to eat, he joked. For the first time in a long while, Dave felt seen, really seen. As they walked through the doors of the restaurant together, the world outside seemed to fade away, and with every step, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Dave stared at the man before him, his mind racing as he tried to process what he just heard. His voice was hesitant, cautious, as though afraid the words might vanish if he questioned them too much. Are you serious? He asked, his tone tinged with disbelief. The man nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. Dead serious, he replied, his voice steady and kind. Standing tall, he extended his hand toward Dave, his gesture confident but unassuming. Let's start with some food. You like barbecue? Dave hesitated. His legs, weak from days of hunger, trembled slightly as he considered the offer. It wasn't just the physical strain. It was the sheer disbelief that someone was offering to help him without expecting anything in return. But something in the man's tone, in the way he looked at Dave like a person rather than a problem, felt genuine. Slowly, Dave reached out and took his hand, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet. Yeah, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I love barbecue. As they began walking down the bustling sidewalk, the reality of the moment started to sink in for Dave. He glanced around nervously, noticing how people stared at them. Some passers-by paused mid-stride, openly gawking. Others pulled out their phones to snap pictures. The sudden attention made Dave's stomach tighten, and he couldn't help but ask, "Why's everyone looking at us?" The man chuckled lightly, the sound rich but easygoing. With a quick motion, he lowered his sunglasses, revealing a face that was instantly recognizable. They probably recognize me, he said casually, his tone almost playful. Dave froze in his tracks, his eyes widening as realization dawned on him. His jaw dropped slightly, and he managed to stammer out, "You're Keanu Reeves?" The name felt strange on his tongue, almost unreal. Keanu grinned, the warmth in his expression making the towering figure somehow feel approachable. Guilty, he said simply, the single word carrying an understated charm. Dave glanced down at the small handful of coins he still clutched in his hand. The weight of those coins seemed insignificant now compared to the moment unfolding before him. He hesitated, his voice dropping to a near whisper as he said, "You don't have to do this." There was a quiet vulnerability in his tone, almost as if he feared being a burden. Keanu stopped walking and turned to look at him, his expression soft but resolute. "Man, it's just food," he said, shrugging as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His tone was steady, with an undercurrent of kindness that made his words land deeply. Everybody deserves to eat. Trust me, I've been hungry before. Ain't no shame in that. Dave studied his face, searching for any sign of insincerity but finding none. The honesty in Keanu's words and the simplicity of his gesture left him momentarily speechless. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He still wasn't entirely sure if any of this was real. but something inside him told him to take the chance. The aroma of barbecue reached them before they even stepped inside the restaurant. The smoky, savory scent wafted through the air, making Dave's stomach growl loudly, a sound he couldn't suppress even if he tried. Hearing it, Keanu laughed heartily, his laughter filled with an easy warmth that eased some of Dave's nerves. "Sounds like you're ready to eat," Keanu said, holding the door open with a sweeping gesture. "Come on, my treat." Dave stepped inside, the scent of smoked meats and sweet barbecue sauce enveloping him like a warm hug. The neon pig on the restaurant sign seemed to shine a little brighter as he crossed the threshold, a symbolic invitation to leave his worries at the door. For the first time in what felt like forever, Dave allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this moment could mark the beginning of something better. The barbecue restaurant buzzed softly with the hum of conversations and the clatter of plates. But all of it faded for a moment when the cashier caught sight of the towering figure approaching her counter. Her eyes widened in astonishment, and she blurted out, "Oh my gosh, are you?" Before she could finish, Keanu raised a hand, his smile kind but firm. "Yeah, it's me," he said, cutting her off gently. "But let's not make a big deal about it. We're just here for some food." He turned to Dave, who stood quietly beside him, still adjusting to the surreal nature of the situation. "Go ahead, man. Order whatever you want," Keanu encouraged, his voice warm and inviting. Dave froze for a moment, staring up at the brightly lit menu board. The options were plentiful, and the sheer variety overwhelmed him. Ribs, pulled pork, brisket, cornbread, and so much more. He hesitated, glancing back at Keanu as if seeking reassurance. Taking a deep breath, he pointed hesitantly to the board. "A pulled pork sandwich, and maybe some mac and cheese. Oh, and sweet tea," he said softly, unsure if he was asking for too much. Keanu grinned, his face lighting up with approval. "Solid choice," he said, nodding. "But let's add some ribs and cornbread too. Can't have a barbecue without cornbread." Before the cashier could ring up the order, Keanu pulled out a crisp $100 bill and handed it to her without hesitation. "Keep the change," he said with a wink, his casual generosity leaving the cashier momentarily stunned. She stammered out a quick thank you, her hands trembling slightly as she handed him the receipt. The two men found a table by the window, where sunlight streamed in, warming the wood-paneled interior of the restaurant. Keanu gestured for Dave to sit first, his easy demeanor making it clear that he wanted Dave to feel at home. As they settled in, the aromas of smoked meats and tangy barbecue sauce filled the air, setting the stage for a meal that was about to be far more than just food. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his relaxed posture making the space feel less formal. He regarded Dave with a calm but curious expression. "So," he said, breaking the comfortable silence, "what's your story, man? How'd you end up out here?" And with those words, Dave began to open up, realizing this wasn't just a meal, it was a moment of human connection, the kind he had long forgotten could exist. Dave hesitated, his hands resting on the table. It wasn't a question he was used to answering, and the weight of it felt heavy. But there was something about Keanu's presence, his relaxed demeanor, his genuine interest, that made Dave feel like he could open up. Slowly, he began to speak, his voice low and hesitant at first. He talked about losing his job, the series of unfortunate events that led to his eviction, and the ongoing struggle to find his footing again. As he spoke, the words began to flow more easily, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like someone was truly listening. Keanu nodded occasionally, his expression thoughtful, but he never interrupted. He simply listened, giving Dave the space to share his story. When the food arrived, Dave's words faltered as his eyes widened at the sight before him. The pulled pork sandwich was massive, the bun practically overflowing with tender, smoky meat. The mac and cheese was creamy, golden, and sprinkled with just the right amount of seasoning, while the sweet tea came in a large, frosty cup that looked like it could quench anyone's thirst. Keanu gestured to the plate, a small grin playing on his lips. "Go on," he said, his voice encouraging. "Dig in." Dave hesitated only for a moment before picking up the sandwich. As he took the first bite, His eyes drifted shut. The flavors were incredible, rich, savory, smoky, and perfectly balanced with just the right amount of tangy barbecue sauce. It was a meal he hadn't even dared to dream of having. And in that moment, it felt like pure magic. "This is amazing," Dave mumbled around a mouthful, his voice muffled but filled with awe. Keanu laughed, a deep, warm sound that filled the space around them. "Told you," he said, leaning back in his chair with satisfaction. "Barbecue never disappoints." The two of them ate in companionable silence for a while, the hum of the restaurant creating a comforting backdrop. For Dave, each bite was more than just food. It was a reminder that he wasn't invisible, that someone cared enough to see him, to treat him with dignity. The simple act of being seated at a table, sharing a meal with someone who listened to his story, made him feel human again in a way he hadn't felt in years. When the meal was nearly finished, Dave set down the last bite of his sandwich, his appetite finally satisfied. He looked across the table at Keanu, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I don't even know how to thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Keanu waved a hand dismissively, his smile kind. "You don't have to thank me, man," he said. "I'm just glad I could help. Everybody needs a little lift sometimes. You know?" Dave nodded, his throat tightening as he tried to find the right words. It wasn't just about the food, or even the money Keanu had spent. It was about being seen, being treated like a person who mattered. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope, a sense that things could get better. As they finished their meal and prepared to leave, Keanu leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but still warm. "You know," he said, his voice low but full of intention, "this doesn't have to end here. Let's figure out what's next." Dave blinked, the weight of Keanu's words sinking in. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like it might hold something good. As the plates were cleared and the hum of the restaurant continued around them, Keanu leaned back in his chair, his frame relaxed but his expression thoughtful. He studied Dave for a moment before standing, his tone purposeful. "All right," he said, clapping his hands together. "Next stop." Dave blinked, confused. "Next stop?" he asked, unsure of what Keanu meant. The warm meal had already been more than he could have ever expected. Keanu smiled and patted him on the back, his tone encouraging. "You need more than just a meal, my man. Let's get you cleaned up." They walked together down the busy street, the afternoon sunlight reflecting off the sleek glass windows of the shops and businesses they passed. Keanu's strides were confident and easy, while Dave hesitated with every step, his gaze falling to his worn shoes and threadbare clothes. As they approached a modern spa with polished windows and a chic, welcoming sign, Dave's steps slowed even more. The place exuded luxury, and the thought of stepping inside made his stomach tighten. "I don't think a place like this would want someone like me," Dave said quietly, his voice tinged with self-doubt. He glanced at his reflection in the pristine glass, the grime on his face and the state of his clothing stark against the polished elegance of the building. Keanu stopped mid-step, turning to face Dave with a look of calm resolve. His voice was firm but carried an unmistakable kindness. "Don't ever say that," he said, his tone steady and reassuring. "Everyone deserves to feel good about themselves. You're not someone like me or someone like them. You're you, and that's enough." The sincerity in Keanu's words hit Dave deeply, and for a moment, he felt the weight of his insecurities lift. He nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting in a faint smile. "Okay," he said softly, "let's do it." The spa's automatic doors slid open, and a wave of cool, scented air greeted them. Behind the counter stood a young receptionist whose professional smile faltered for just a moment when she recognized the towering figure entering the lobby. Her eyes widened as she tried to maintain her composure. "Oh my, welcome," she stammered. "How can we help you?" Keanu grinned, his easy demeanor putting her at ease. "My buddy here needs the work, haircut, shave, shower. Hook him up," he said with a nod toward Dave. The receptionist glanced at Dave, her expression softening as she saw the uncertainty in his eyes. "Of course," she said warmly. "We'll take great care of him." A stylist appeared moments later, a kind smile on her face as she gestured for Dave to follow her. He glanced back at Keanu, who gave him a thumbs up before settling into a chair in the lobby. "Go on," Keanu said with a reassuring nod. "You're in good hands." The stylist led Dave to the back, chatting with him in a friendly tone as she worked. She started with his hair, carefully trimming away the matted tangles and uneven patches until his head felt lighter. With each snip of the scissors, Dave felt a little more of his old self returning. Next came the shave, a soothing process that left his face smooth and refreshed for the first time in years. The stylist handed him a fluffy towel and directed him to the showers. The hot water was nothing short of a revelation. As it cascaded over his skin, it washed away not only the grime and tension, but also some of the emotional weight he had been carrying. Dave stood under the stream for a long moment, letting the warmth envelop him. By the time he stepped out and dried off, he felt like a completely different person. When he returned to the dressing area, he found a neatly folded set of clean clothes waiting for him: jeans, a soft t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. All items Keanu had thoughtfully picked out. Dave changed into them, the fabric soft against his freshly cleaned skin. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt human. As Dave walked back into the lobby, Keanu looked up from his phone, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Look at you, man," he said, standing up and gesturing dramatically. "You clean up real nice. I'm telling you, Hollywood's going to be calling any day now." Dave laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that felt foreign but wonderful. "Thanks," he said, his voice steady and filled with gratitude. "I feel like a new person." Keanu clapped him on the shoulder, his tone light but sincere. "Good. That's what I like to hear." He paused for a moment, then added with a grin, "Now, let's keep this train rolling. You can't walk around feeling fresh like that without some new gear to match. Let's hit the stores." Keanu's words carried a weight that resonated deeply with Dave. It wasn't just about the clean shave or the fresh clothes. It was about being reminded of his own worth, about being seen and valued as a person. For the first time in years, Dave felt a spark of confidence, a glimmer of hope that things could truly change. As they stepped out of the spa and into the bustling streets, the sunlight seemed a little brighter, the air a little lighter. Dave glanced at Keanu, who gave him a knowing smile, and for the first time in a long time, Dave allowed himself to believe that better days were ahead. At the mall, the bright lights and bustling energy were almost overwhelming for Dave, who hadn't been in a place like this in years. He followed Keanu through the aisles of a clothing store, his steps tentative but his heart quietly hopeful. Keanu handed him a shopping basket and flashed a grin. "All right, man, go for it. Pick out whatever you need." Dave hesitated at first, unsure where to start, but Keanu's encouragement pushed him forward. Slowly, he began adding items to the basket: a few pairs of jeans, some shirts, a sturdy jacket, and a pair of sneakers that fit perfectly. Each piece felt like a step toward a life he had nearly forgotten was possible, a life where he could hold his head high and feel proud of his appearance. Keanu kept the mood light, cracking jokes as Dave chose his items. By the time they reached the checkout, the basket was full. Dave stood to the side, his hands stuffed into his pockets. As Keanu placed the items on the counter, the cashier rang up the total, her eyes widening slightly at the number. Without a moment's hesitation, Keanu pulled out his wallet and handed her his card. "Man, you didn't have to do all this," Dave said softly, his voice tinged with disbelief as he watched Keanu pay. Keanu turned to him with a smile that was both kind and reassuring. "Don't worry about it," he said, waving off Dave's concerns. As the cashier handed over the bags, Keanu joked with her, making her laugh as she thanked him. The ease and warmth in his demeanor made the entire interaction feel less like an act of charity and more like a friend helping another friend. As they stepped out of the store into the crisp evening air, Dave walked a little taller, the weight of the bags in his hands grounding him in the reality of the moment. For the first time in years, he felt like he had the tools to move forward, like he could see a future that didn't feel so out of reach. Dave turned to Keanu, his steps slowing as he searched for the right words. His voice, though quiet, carried a steadiness that hadn't been there before. "Why are you doing all this for me?" he asked, his eyes meeting Keanu's with a mix of gratitude and vulnerability. Keanu stopped walking and looked at him, his expression softening. "Because I can," he said simply, his tone steady but filled with meaning. "And because I've been blessed. It's only right to pass that on when I can." His words weren't grandiose or rehearsed. They were spoken with the sincerity of someone who understood the value of giving back. Over the following months, those words stayed with Dave as he worked to rebuild his life. With Keanu's support, he found shelter at a place Keanu had recommended, a clean, welcoming space that provided not only a warm bed but also access to resources he desperately needed. The staff at the shelter helped him navigate job applications, prepare for interviews, and reconnect with a sense of purpose he thought he'd lost. Dave threw himself into the opportunities before him, determined to make the most of the second chance he had been given. Soon, he secured a part-time job at a local grocery store, a humble but steady position that allowed him to start saving for his future. Each paycheck, no matter how small, felt like a victory, a tangible reminder of how far he had come since that fateful day on Hollywood Boulevard. As time went on, Dave often found himself reflecting on the moments he'd shared with Keanu Reeves. It wasn't just the meal, the clothes, or even the shelter that had changed his life. It was the way Keanu had treated him. In a world that seemed to ignore him, Keanu had made him feel seen, valued, and worthy of respect. That simple act of kindness had ignited something within Dave, a spark of hope and a newfound desire to pass that kindness on to others who were struggling, just as he once had. When Dave's circumstances improved and he managed to get back on his feet, he kept his promise to Keanu. He began paying it forward in small but meaningful ways. Sometimes it was buying a meal for someone in need. Other times, it was offering a kind word, a warm smile, or a helping hand to a stranger. Each act of generosity felt like a way of honoring the compassion that had transformed his own life. For Dave, these gestures weren't about grandiosity. They were about connection, about showing others that they mattered. Just as Keanu had shown him, Dave's journey was not without its challenges. There were days when doubt and insecurity crept back into his mind, days when the road ahead felt long and uncertain. But the lessons he had learned from Keanu stayed with him, serving as a guiding light during those darker moments. He had come to understand that kindness had the power to create ripples, waves of positivity that could inspire change not just for the person receiving it, but for everyone around them. Every time Dave helped someone else, he saw a bit of his own story reflected back at him. He remembered what it felt like to be at his lowest, to believe that the world had forgotten him. And yet, he also remembered the day someone had stopped to say, "You matter," and how that simple acknowledgement had changed everything. It was a lesson he carried with him and one he was determined to share with others. Meanwhile, Keanu never spoke publicly about what he had done for Dave. For him, it had never been about recognition or praise. It was simply about doing the right thing. His actions were born from a genuine belief in the power of compassion and the importance of lifting others up when they needed it most. Though he remained silent on the matter, the impact of his generosity resonated far beyond that single moment. The story of his kindness, passed along quietly by those who had witnessed it, became a testament to the transformative power of humility and humanity. As Dave worked to rebuild his life, Keanu's words stayed with him. He often thought back to that day at the mall, to the warmth and sincerity in Keanu's voice when he said, "You're you, and that's enough." Those simple yet profound words became a mantra for Dave, a reminder that his worth wasn't defined by his circumstances, but by who he was as a person. Dave's life continued to move forward, one small step at a time, with steady work and a growing sense of purpose. He began to envision a future that felt brighter and more secure. Whenever he faced moments of doubt, he would recall the moments he spent walking through the bustling streets of Los Angeles with Keanu by his side. He remembered the laughter they shared, the way Keanu had encouraged him to stand a little taller, and the hope that had been rekindled in his heart. But more than anything, Dave remembered the lesson that had been imparted to him. Kindness has the power to transform. It isn't about grand gestures or sweeping acts of heroism. It's about the quiet moments of connection, the small, meaningful ways we show others that they matter. And when kindness is shared, its impact spreads far beyond what we can see. creating ripples of hope that touch countless lives. As the years passed, Dave became a living testament to the power of compassion. The man who had once felt invisible now walked through life with his head held high, his heart full of gratitude. And just as Keanu had lifted him up, Dave made it his mission to lift others. Whether it was helping someone find shelter, offering encouragement, or simply listening, Dave became a source of light for those who needed it most. Keanu's quiet act of generosity had not only changed one man's life, it had inspired a movement of kindness, a ripple effect that continued to grow with each person Dave helped. For both men, the experience served as a reminder of the profound impact we can have on one another when we choose to act with compassion and humanity. In the end, Dave's story wasn't just about overcoming hardship. It was a story of resilience, hope, and the extraordinary power of simple kindness, a story that began with one man saying, "Let's figure this out together," and grew into a journey of transformation and inspiration. And so, Dave's journey became a testament to how even the smallest acts of kindness can ignite profound change. He began sharing his story with others, not for recognition, but to remind people of their capacity to make a difference. Community centers, schools, and shelters welcomed him as a speaker, where his words resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to believe in the power of compassion. Dave often said, "You don't have to change the world, just change one moment for someone." Slowly but surely, his message reached farther than he ever imagined, sparking a collective shift in perspective. Kindness, Dave realized, wasn't just an act, it was a way of life.